This is Dateline News and Conversation. Tonight, a special edition, a special report. The purpose of the show is to dispel the United States lies and propaganda claiming that Russia illegally invaded and attacked Ukraine. This lie has been repeated daily in the last 2 years by all of the major media platforms in the United States and across the European Union. Most Americans have not been able to even accept a counter argument. Now, as many of you know, I've lost many friends, including family members, because I came to Russia for the first time in 2016 to find out for myself the truth about Russia and the Russian people. I had ceased to believe anything that my government had been telling me for my entire life. I returned in 2018 and 2019 with 2 delegations of American citizen diplomats. I documented both of those trips. I traveled to several different Russian cities, villages, and towns. In 2020, I came to live in Yalta, the Crimea of the Russian Federation. That's 4 years ago. Because of this, and the more than 400 films, videos, and podcasts I've done trying to counter the American narrative and propaganda against all things Russia, Russian people, and President Putin, I've lost many friends, even family, who no longer talk to me. They consider me a traitor. What I will do tonight is set forth a convincing argument that Russia was provoked to enter Ukraine with a special military operation in February of 2 years ago. I will lay out a historical, factual review going back to 1945, 79 years ago, that will prove without a shred of doubt that the United States has been bent on destroying the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation for 79 years. Now, what was the genesis for this show? What was the reason that I felt compelled to do a show like this? Well, a week or so ago, immediately after Tucker Carlson's historic interview with Vladimir Putin, which has been seen over 200 million times around the world, and in that email, I pleaded with people to also watch President Putin's address to the Russian Federation and the world, February 22nd, 2022, on why Russia was embarking on the special military operation in Ukraine. I had a friend, a classmate for many years, who was the only person who responded to that mass mailing. And this is what he said. But when in your journey as a Carmelite did you find that war is a solution for human suffering? This is not a rhetorical question. I am asking you directly for an answer. Well, it took me over a week to compose a reply to him, and most of that reply is contained in this report. My direct answer to him was, quote, in my journey as a Carmelite, student, seminarian, and priest for a total of 27 years, and as a student of theology in Rome, I learned about the just war doctrine. The classic formulation of the just war doctrine of the Catholic Church is as follows, and I quote, the strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force require rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous decision and conditions of moral legitimacy. Now, that's the official teaching of the Catholic Church, but this principle is also enshrined in the United Nations Charter and international law for the legitimate defense of one country, sovereign nation, by military force when attacked by someone else. Now, some of you know something about my history and my work for the past 20 years. And you know that I am an anti-war, anti-US foreign policy, anti-imperialism, and emphatically anti-nuclear war. I was in the seminary during the Vietnam War, and that was our wake-up call. We later learned that that war was an unjust, unprovoked war that we were lied to about by General Westmoreland and Presidents Johnson and Nixon and the entire government establishment. Many of you who were alive at that time will remember how the entire country turned against that war and eventually brought it to an end. During my 4 years of study in Rome and Europe, I had the opportunity to travel to countries across Europe that had been devastated by World War II. I had classmates from many European countries, as well as Asian countries, the Philippines, South America. I learned how they felt about the United States and the United Kingdom interfering in and destroying their countries. It was an eye-opening experience and a wake-up call for me. For the first time in my life, I met people who didn't like what America did and was doing. That was the time of civil rights in the United States. It was the time of the Vietnam War. And it was constantly held up to me that the United States wasn't this great, wonderful country that was promoting freedom and democracy around the world. I began to change my view of my country and the world. Now, fast forwarding ahead, beginning in 2008, and somewhere in that time frame, I became very involved in the anti-war movements And I documented protests of the United States provoking wars against Iraq 2 times, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and of course, the disastrous and deplorable 20-year war in Afghanistan that had ended with the disgraceful and embarrassing evacuation on August 30th, 2021. Again, we were repeatedly lied to about all of this. We were lied to enter the wars in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and we were lied to about Afghanistan. But I have to tell you this. I was not yet radicalized, not until my trip to Jeju Island in South Korea in 2012, when I discovered the horrific massacre of as many as 60,000 innocent civilians, all peasants, farmers, and fishermen, who revolted against the United States military government in Korea in 1945. They believed that they had been liberated from 38 years of Japanese occupation at the end of World War II, only to realize that the United States would not allow free elections and the unification of Korea. And so these peasants rose up against the United States military government in Korea. The Japanese flag came down, the American flag rose up, and the United States military now governed Korea. In 1946 and 47, these people rose up. They were unarmed. All they had were sticks and stones, bows and arrows, shovels. And when they rose up against the government, the United States organized, funded, commanded directly the massacre of as many as 60,000 innocent civilians. It was a free fire zone over this tiny island. This had remained classified in both South Korea and the United States until about the year 2000. When I learned this, after visiting the April 3rd Peace Museum in Jeju City, I was angered. I was ashamed and horrified to learn what my country had done to organize, equip, and command this massacre. In fact, it was the first time in history that the United States had used overwhelming violence against indigenous people fighting for the right to self-determination, freedom, and a free and open society. You can see this film, The Ghost of Jeju, for free on YouTube. I will put the link in the description to this show. Going to Jeju Island and making this film changed my life and the trajectory of my life, turned me into a fiercely anti-American foreign policy, anti-war, and anti-imperialism radical. The Ghost of Jeju was ignored in the United States by 20 out of 21 film festivals in the entire movie industry. If you watch it, you will understand why. Only one film festival, the Chicago Peace on Earth Film Festival, accepted it and gave it a major award. Since that time, in 2013, this film has been translated into 7 languages and seen hundreds of thousands of times all over the world for free. All of this remained classified, as I mentioned, but I was fortunate to receive many photos, videos, and documents from the 2003 Peace Museum archives in Jeju City, South Korea. When I returned to the States, I really didn't know what to do. I thought I was going to Jeju Island to film a protest that had been going on for 6 or 7 years against the construction of a massive naval base in the village of Kangjong that would port American destroyers equipped with missile defense technology, nuclear submarines, and aircraft carriers to accommodate Obama's pivot to Asia. I had to go to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, to begin to find more information about what happened in South Korea after World War II and surrounding the events of 1946 and 47. It was at this time that I began to discover and research the real history of the United States that we were never taught in school. And this began for me a serious investigation into the United States history from the time the white European colonialists came to America in the 15th century. I hadn't read Howard Zinn's History of the People of the United States at that time, but what I did learn, and I finally realized, was that our entire history had been based on the genocide of the original peoples, the Native Americans. Over 100 million were massacred. And I learned that our history was based on this genocide and the theft of land and resources. And it's a history that has continued to the present day. America's interests around the world are not freedom and democracy. They're land and resources of other countries on every continent on this planet. I learned that America has never been the exceptional nation, the city on the hill, a beacon of freedom and democracy for the rest of the world, a model for all to copy. Our history has been a carefully constructed narrative that has been hardwired in all of us since the very beginning. Now, when I said going to South Korea and making this film changed my life and the trajectory of my life, it was 2016, while working on my second feature documentary, 30 Seconds to Midnight, which is about the real existential threat of nuclear war between the United States and Russia. And this led to the following. I just had to go to Russia to find out for myself the truth about Russia and the Russian people. As I mentioned, I no longer believe the lies and the unproven fabrications about Russia that we have been told since Harry Truman dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. I will come back to this important date shortly. But for now, it was not to end the war in the Pacific. That has been well established. But it was assigned to Stalin in the Soviet Union, whom Truman and his advisors hated. It was assigned to show Stalin who was boss. Ever since that time, everyone from Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Carter, Reagan, to the very present imbecile in the White House, they have all lied about Russia, and every war they have illegally conducted in many sovereign nations around the world. In demonizing Russia, Ronald Reagan perhaps was the worst, calling the Soviet Union the Red Menace, a godless nation, the source of evil in the world. So in 2016, I first visited Odessa in Ukraine to find out what really happened there in 2014, the Maidan, the coup d'etat, and the massacre of close to 100 people in the Union Trade Hall in Odessa by right-wing neo-Nazi radicals. From there, I went to Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Crimea. In Crimea, I learned firsthand from hundreds of people, including journalists, politicians, academics, and students, that Russia did not invade and annex Crimea. The return to Russia via a referendum, and I have to point out, Crimea had belonged to Russia since Catherine the Great annexed it from the Ottoman Empire. And this referendum was an expression of the right of self-determination enshrined in the UN Charter and international law. The people there, the people, not the military, were led by two very smart individuals, politicians, one of whom I have met, who organized the referendum that was observed by observers from around the world. Over 85% of the total population took part in the referendum, which was approved by an astonishing 98% of all of them. I also documented this fact in a short film called Je suis Russia. I will also post the link to that short video in the description. And from that time, I began to read many dozens of Putin's speeches, and I watched many of his 4-hour marathon press conferences with journalists from all over the world. He spent over 4 hours with them without notes, without a teleprompter, without an expert whispering into his ear, but sitting back and relaxed and calmly responding to every question, many of them very pointed. He did it all from his incredible intelligent intellect. And at the same time, I began to look at his actions over the past 24 years that he's been in power. 4 of those were as prime minister. I have to point out, Russia under Putin has never attacked or invaded another country. Some of you are going to say, well, there was Georgia, South Ossetia, and Chechnya. But all of these interventions were about putting down insurrectionist terrorist uprisings in those countries that were friendly to and bordered Russia. I also want to point out, Russia, unlike the United States, does not have 800 military bases in over 90 countries around the world. It only has bases in Syria, Sudan, and Vietnam, all by invitation, none by invasions. Now, I will address the special military operation in Ukraine shortly. My classmate obviously was thinking that because I was justifying Russia's special military operation, that I had become in favor of war and the invasion of sovereign nations. But as I said, I will come back to that in a moment. My film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, was released in 2017, And like the ghost of Jeju, it was ignored in the United States, but seen tens of thousands of times across the USA and the world. I will post the link to 30 Seconds to Midnight in the description of this show. If you haven't seen it, I hope you will. It's a real eye opener and a very important history lesson. You will see the details of U.S. wars and wars and interventions by every president since John Kennedy. Now, since coming to Russia for the first time in 2016, I have made over 400 films, videos, and podcasts. I have tried to find out for myself the truth about Russia and the Russian people. As I mentioned, I finally decided in 2020 to come and live here in the Russian Federation. During these past 4 years, I have immersed myself in Russian history, culture, the arts, and literature. I have closely watched and listened to everything President Putin has said and done. I have many friends in Russia. Most of them overwhelmingly support their president. His approval rating has been hovering in the 80th percentile. But I also have several very good friends who do not like him or agree with his domestic policies and what the Russian government stands for. There is opposition here. There's opposition to Putin, but it is not significant. I'm sure many of you are going to say, well, Putin killed Alexei Navalny, his critic. The fact is, Alexei Navalny was a convicted felon for extortion and embezzlement and for parole violation. He never had more than 2% support in his attempts to run for president. Now, here's something you may not know. Alexei Navalny was groomed by George Soros and the CIA, brought to the United States to study at Yale. Like so many others, leaders across the Eurasian continent, Putin had absolutely nothing to gain by this guy's death in prison, where he would remain for at least another dozen years and was no threat whatsoever to Putin's re-election coming up very soon in March. As I mentioned, in the past 4 years, I have produced over 400 videos, films, and podcasts interviewing Russians and other experts. I felt that Americans and others might have a change of mind, seeing through my lens in videos what Russians are like and what Russia is really like. You see, I've been searching for the truth since I studied in Rome, and that eventually led to me leaving the church and the Carmelite order. Everything about Christianity and Catholicism has been made up by men long after Jesus died. Now, I'm a believer. I'm a believer in the radical Jesus, who never founded a church, never made up dozens of doctrines, and never created canon law. He only asked his followers to love one another, forgive as many times as it was necessary, and to minister to the sick, the lame, the stabled, the poor, and sinners. And what he told his followers, disciples, apostles, if you wish, he told them to go out and share this example. That's all. And he told them to go with nothing but the clothes on their backs, the sandals on their feet, and the staffs in their hands. He simply told them to share by example what they had learned. That's it. Now, moving on. I wonder if those of you watching saw President Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson. I mentioned it's been seen over 200 million times around the world. And I wonder if any of you have watched his speech on the eve of the special military operation in Ukraine in February of 2022. I will post that speech in the description of this show. If you haven't watched it, I'm pleading with you to please do. The interview with Carlson and this speech should help people with open minds, a bit of common sense, and a tiny bit of critical thinking will begin to change their opinions about Russia and Putin. I say should, because I have already experienced the reaction of several who just wrote it all off as if it's Russian propaganda and not worthy to listen to. How disappointing and discouraging is that? You know, were it not for my education with the Carmelites in liberal arts, including philosophy and theology, and my time in Rome, I would not have been able to develop the ability to see the world and the USA as I do now. And now, I come to the critical question. Was Russia provoked to intervene in Ukraine? Did Russia claim the right to self-defense as enshrined in the Just War Doctrine, the UN Charter, and international law? Well, I propose a brief review of U.S. military interventions and meddling in the affairs of other nations. Let's start here. August 1945. Harry S. Truman drops the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not to end the war, as he claimed, but, as I said, as a sign to Stalin and the Soviet Union. September 1945, Operation Unthinkable. The US and UK and the United Kingdom planned to destroy the Soviet Union. Churchill even favored attacking the Kremlin. 1949, Operation Drop Shot. A Pentagon plan to use nukes and 26,000 regular bombs on 20 targets in 100 cities in Russia, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. 1949, January 1957, the Pentagon planned a land invasion to destroy Russia. June 1949 to July 1953. The Korean War ended without a peace treaty. Over 1 million people were killed, and the USA carpet-bombed North Korea until there was nothing left. The USA today has over 40 military bases in South Korea and continues to threaten and provoke both North Korea and China. And the USA retains the right to completely control and dictate all of South Korea's military actions. November 1955 to April 1975. The Vietnam War against Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. They lied to us about the need to enter that war. Again, massive carpet bombings with napalm that killed millions of Vietnamese and continues to kill and maim millions more with depleted uranium and unexploded ordnances. We lost, America lost, over 55,000 men and women in that disgraceful war that we were lied into. Remember the Gulf of Tonkin false flag? 1979 to 1990, The Iran-Contra war against Nicaragua. Some would argue it continues today with America's attempts to overthrow the democratically elected government. During the 1970s and 1980s, there were the invasions of El Salvador, Panama, Haiti. 2001 to 2021, as I mentioned before, the Afghan War. August 2nd, 1990 to 1991. Bush first, the Gulf War. March 2003, George W. Bush's shock and awe war on Iraq that killed over 1 million people, bombed that country back to the Stone Age, stole its wealth and its resources, its ancient artifacts. And Bush declared victory on an aircraft carrier after he landed with an American fighter jet pilot. In September 2014, the United States invaded Syria. November 2015 to 2019, United States and its allies bombed Libya back to the Stone Age. It is now a lawless country. Thousands, maybe millions of people have migrated, left for Europe, where they are now causing serious problems. Now, all of these wars were based on proven lies. None have been sanctioned or approved by the United Nations. And just last year, October 7th, 2023, continues to the present day the genocide in Palestine. The United States continues to send billions of dollars of weapons and money to the Zionist Israelis. It refuses to demand a ceasefire or do anything to get Israel to stop this genocide. Now some 26,000 innocent men, women, and children massacred, shot dead in the streets by snipers and Israeli military. The entire world now is disgusted by this. The entire world now is rising up almost everywhere you look in opposition to this genocide. Since 1945, the United States has murdered over 21 million innocent civilians all over the world. Many of you are aware of this. The United States spends more money on war than the next 10 countries combined, including China and Russia. The United States, when you look at its annual spending on war, is over $1 trillion annually, not just on the Defense Department, but you have to include all of the intelligence agencies, including the CIA, and including NASA, which is dual purpose, civilian and military. I'd like to point out, by comparison, Russia only spends $85 billion a year on war defense. Now, for a little review of the USA, Soviet, and Russian history. This is the direct lead up to the conflict in Ukraine today. In the 1990s, under Boris Yeltsin, George H.W. Bush executed Jeffrey Sachs' shock therapy on the Russian economy, which led to the privatization of Russia's assets, the creation of a class of oligarchs, the death of more than 1 million Russians, widespread poverty, violent crime, the cessation of payments and pensions, and a decline in the average lifespan of 10 years. In 1991, marked the fall of the Soviet Union. All of Eastern Europe was freed. 1991, the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. Why was NATO needed any longer? The Soviet Union did not exist. The Warsaw Pact, designed to defend the Soviet Union, dissolved. Russia was no longer a threat. It was in disarray. Russia was in the ashes, completely defeated and almost entirely destroyed. 1991, the same year, United States Secretary of State James Baker, under George Herbert Walker Bush, promised Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would not move 1 inch east towards Russia. Oh, they're saying now, some are, this was a verbal promise, and therefore it's not binding. It's been proven that notes taken in Germany, even the United Kingdom, and the United States, this promise, in fact, was made. And since that time, and Bill Clinton began the encroachment, 13 former Soviet republics have joined NATO, and just recently, Sweden and Finland. Russia was lied to. It wasn't the first time, it wouldn't be the last. And then in the 1990s through the present day, the United States and NATO have conducted annual massive military exercises, gaming a first strike attack on Russia. And this takes place all across Europe and in the former Soviet republics that have become part of NATO. And these exercises are going on all around Russia and Russia's borders. The largest exercise ever is taking place as I speak, Operation Steadfast Defender. It will continue until May of this year, with over 90,000 NATO personnel, thousands of tanks, artillery, ships, fighter planes, and there are also nuclear missiles in Poland, Romania, and several European countries. One massive war game designed to assimilate and synchronize this massive attack to destroy Russia. How else can any honest person see all of this as a direct existential and real threat to Russia's security and existence? It's impossible to deny. In 2000, historic time in Russian history, Putin is elected president of Russia and began the long and arduous task of rebuilding Russia as a sovereign and independent nation. But what many people don't know is in the year 2000, after he became president, he formally asked the United States and NATO to become a member of NATO and to join the European Security Agreement. And of course, he is rebuffed, refused. And then, at the Munich Security Conference in 2007, Putin gives a speech with John McCain sitting in the front row, publicly admonishing the United States as the main country threatening and destabilizing the world. At that point in history, Vladimir Putin became the United States public enemy number one. A target was painted in red on his chest. Here's the link to that speech. I encourage you to watch it. It'll be in the details description of this show. From the 1990s to 2023, the United States unilaterally pulled out of every nuclear arms treaty with Russia. The United States is the only nuclear-armed country to have a first strike nuclear doctrine against Russia, China, and any country that poses a threat to the United States. No other country, including Russia and China, have a doctrine that states they will use a nuclear missile for a first strike. They only authorize a retaliatory strike if attacked. Now, to specifically answer a few very direct questions, obviously referring to the conflict in Ukraine. In 2014, the coup d'etat in Kiev, known as Maidan, was funded, planned, and executed by the United States of America. Joe Biden was Obama's point man, his general in Ukraine. He visited there a dozen times. Victoria Nuland was Hillary Clinton's Undersecretary of State. You will surely remember the infamous intercepted phone call between Victoria Nuland and then Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, openly discussing 2 weeks before the coup the overthrow of the democratically elected president, Yanukovych, and suggesting who should replace him. And Nuland boldly saying, "Fuck the EU. We don't care what they think." There's a clip of that video in the description. If you haven't seen it, you must. And you surely have seen the videos of Nuland and McCain and other politicians urging the overthrow of Yanukovych during the Maidan, during the protest, urging the overthrow of the government, instigating and encouraging violence. These videos are still all over YouTube. Victoria Nuland bragged that we spent $5 billion on this experiment in democracy. And hopefully you've seen Joe Biden bragging about threatening then President Poroshenko to fire the Attorney General of Ukraine because he was investigating Hunter's involvement with Burisma Oil Company. He was also investigating the Biden crime family's treasonous behavior, money laundering, and accepting of bribes for access. The video of this clip is in the description as well. Now, it's all been publicly and blatantly presented out there for anyone willing to look on YouTube and other social media platforms, as well as media outlets around the world that covered it all. This just shows the arrogance, the mendacity, and the sense of lawlessness of the United States of America and its elected officials. 2014 also began the 10-year-long war now on the breakaway republics of Donetsk and Lugansk in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. They wanted no part of the coup d'etat and the violence that took place. The people in this region are almost all predominantly ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking. They pleaded with Putin to take them back, and he eventually did. Now, those attacks, 10 years, funded by, organized by, commanded directly by the United States of America and NATO, have killed more than 26,000 innocent civilians and destroyed civilian infrastructure, churches, hospitals, and schools. There are no military formations, no military bases or targets anywhere in those regions. I was there on 2 occasions in 2019 to document what I have just told you, and I did that in several short videos. They're all available on my YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube and search for me as Alfredo Balduc. ALFREDO BOLDUC. By the way, in case you didn't know, my original YouTube channel was permanently deleted with over 550 films, videos, and podcasts. You talk about censorship for countering the official narrative and telling the truth. In March of 2014, the same year, and a month after the overthrow of the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Crimea conducted a referendum. Why? Because Crimea is vastly majority Russian-speaking in population. They wanted no part of the violence that occurred in Kiev. The attacks on Crimea over the past 2 years and the threats of a NATO invasion today are all public and not even concealed. In December of 2021, 3 months before the conflict in Ukraine began, Putin again sent a formal proposal to Biden, asking, and to NATO and to the EU, asking them to please accept Russia's security guarantees. Again, he was rebuffed and ignored. And then in 2022, the Minsk agreements were signed. Later, Angela Merkel of Germany, Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, who at the time who was the former president of Ukraine, and Francois Hollande of France, all admitted that the agreements, the Minsk agreements, were only a ruse, a ruse to trick Russia so Ukraine could be ready for a major war against Russia. Out and out deceit, lies, admitted and done out there in the world, in the open for the world to see. And in the last year, 2022 and 23, the government in the United States, in the persons of Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, Kirby, Austin, Lindsey Graham, and others in Congress, have all been beating the drums for war, even threatening and demanding nuclear war. And your president, a disgusting senile old man who has a hard time getting off the stage or walking, just called Vladimir Putin a crazy son of a bitch. Are you not ashamed of this, America? This behavior is unprecedented, certainly in modern history, anything any of us can remember. And listen to the words coming out of the mouths of Biden and the others. The rhetoric is over the top and unprecedented. What are they saying now? Russia and China are our enemies. And when you call somebody an enemy, you are really basically declaring war on them. And that's what the United States has basically done to Russia and to China, and China also knows it. If you just look back over most of our lifetimes, all the enemies of the United States, who were they? Who did we slander? Who did we condemn? Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, al-Assad of Syria, the Ayatollah of Iran. The list goes on and on and on. The United States demonizes the heads of the countries it does not like. Now, the United States is directly threatening China by supplying Taiwan with military hardware, money, and directly meddling in their internal affairs. How China can put up with this? It can't and it won't. It has warned of a direct war with the United States and its allies. We're close to that. And that means nuclear war. There will be no conventional land-based wars. And now getting back to Crimea, where I live. The bridge at Kerch that connects Crimea with the Russian mainland has been bombed twice, partially destroyed. Oh my gosh, who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? Europe clearly had no motive to do that. Why would Russia blow up its own pipelines that it spent billions of dollars building, through which Russia would sell cheap gas to Germany and Europe? The gas that their entire industries have been dependent on to grow and be successful. Biden clearly stated it publicly when he bragged, we have the will and the ability to do it, and we will. Victoria Nuland basically said the same thing as did Blinken and others. And I don't know if you've read Cy Hirsch's bombshell scathing revelation about who did it, pointed the finger directly at the United States, the CIA. If you haven't seen it, the link to that bombshell report by Cy Hirsch is in the description. Now, this conflict in Ukraine is not and has never been between Russia and Ukraine. Yes, it's a proxy war between the United States and Russia, fought on the territory of Ukraine, through which every invasion of Russia has passed. The United States government has spent more than $150 billion of your tax money, America, to fund this war in Ukraine, which it is losing badly. NATO and the EU countries have spent close to $100 billion. This money has gone for military hardware, direct funding of the Ukrainian government, yeah, get that, pensions and salaries. And Ukraine being the most corrupt country in the world, pretty much accepted internationally, money is definitely being funded to Zelensky. He's a billionaire. His gang of neo-Nazis, and yes, millions kicked back to the likes of Biden, Nuland, the CIA, and other lowlifes who are on the take. It is the absolutely stated doctrine of the White House, the State Department, the War Department, and the CIA that the goal of American foreign policy is to destabilize Russia, overthrow Putin, balkanize Russia, and steal its resources. This has been repeated almost daily by all of the people I've just mentioned in Joseph Biden's cabinet. America has threatened and provoked Russia rhetorically, militarily, economically, with unprecedented sanctions, and politically at the United States and with its vassals. How disgusting. Now, it should be clear by now that Russia was provoked by the United States and its vassals to defend itself by entering into Ukraine. Russia had three main goals for the special military operation, may I remind you. The first was the demilitarization of Ukraine. What that means is to make sure that there will be no mercenaries, no foreign advisors, no foreign troops, and a completely disabled Ukrainian military. The second goal, the denazification of Ukraine. Now, many of you probably cannot believe there are Nazis in Ukraine. I've seen it myself when I was in Odessa. There's ample documentation, thousands of pictures and videos all over YouTube showing Ukrainian troops with Nazi tattoos, Nazi symbols, swastikas, and these are the official uniforms of Ukraine. The third goal is to ensure a neutral and friendly Ukraine to Russia. What that implies, the complete removal of the existing government, which is infiltrated by nationalist, right-wing, and neo-Nazi factions, and a rewriting of the Constitution. Russia only wanted guarantees for its own security and to exist in peace with America, Europe, and the rest of the world. How can you not agree with any of the above, which I have just laid out for you? The arguments I have presented and the facts, in my opinion, clearly show the intent of the United States, NATO, and the EU to meddle in Russia's internal affairs and to destroy it, and therefore guarantees Russia the absolute right to defend itself, which is enshrined in the UN Charter, international law, and the just war doctrine. I hope people will take the time to digest what I have just presented and to watch the films that I have included in the description, and I hope that you might begin if you don't already, to see things in a very different light. My films, including the last film, Who Are These Russians and Why Do We Hate Them? Also in the description will be a link. They are all historical documentaries. They're not my opinion. Not surprisingly, they have all resonated and been appreciated by thousands of Americans and perhaps millions of people around the world. The screenings have all been free and open to the public. I have not made any money on these films. I made these films because I believed the information was so important and wasn't being seen elsewhere. Now, I'd like to end with this. It's been an amazing journey, searching for truth all over the world. But I am sad to say that I have been ostracized and condemned by many people I thought were close friends. I am saddened that so many people seem hardwired to believe everything their government has been telling them, when there are so many examples of how we have been lied to for so long. It really saddens me to see what is happening in my country now. The anger, the hatred, the political divisions, the chaos, the situation at the border, wokeism, liberalism, political correctness, gender insanity. I worry for my kids and my grandkids. What kind of a future will they have in a country with a $34 trillion national debt and a culture that is in moral decline? I see the same thing happening all across Western and Eastern Europe. All war crazy and all declining rapidly in terms of the economy, their cultures, and their sovereignty. Russia is in stark contrast to all of that. Russia is a peaceful, safe, harmonious, and united country. Despite all those sanctions, Russia's economy is growing. Agriculture and food production have become self-sustaining. Russia is shipping grain and food to countries in Africa for free. I have benefited so much from living here, totally immersed in an amazing culture that is deep and rich. It is a country that is protecting traditional human values, family values. The different religions, Orthodox, Catholic, Muslim, Protestant, and Jews, live peacefully side by side as they have been for 1,000 years. I suspect that some of you watching this may say that I become brainwashed or am a Kremlin asset, or worse, a Putinista. All I can say to that is, if you came here to see for yourself, your eyes would be opened. It has been the same for many hundreds of Americans who have come here, even during the Soviet era, seeking to see and find out for themselves the truth. As a final note, surely some of you are aware of the BRICS movement. Russia and China are leaders of that movement. Last year, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, joined BRICS. And there are another 24 countries applying for membership this year. These countries represent a larger GDP and investment capabilities than all of the G7 countries combined. Let that sink in for a minute. They are also developing their own international monetary transfer system. Russia, China, India, Saudi Arabia, and several other countries in the Middle East and Africa and South America are abandoning the United States dollar and trading in their own currencies. What will this mean for the entire U.S. and Western economies? Many United States bankers and leading economists in America and around the world are predicting a collapse of the economy. They realize the dollar is no longer trusted when the United States has sanctioned more than 50 countries, including Russia and China, and its $34 trillion in debt. Anyone with any bit of common sense can understand that is simply not sustainable. Not only that, but the United States has also lost what respect it once had as a reliable partner. The rest of the world is now afraid of the United States and looking for a new world order based on the UN Charter and the strict observance of international law, not the United States rule-based order, based on the sovereignty of all nations, development that benefits everybody, and the replacement of war, power, and the hegemonic rule of the United States with diplomacy. I believe we are at a critical point in history. As I have said and written many times, we are experiencing the epic battle for the future order of the world. Will those people controlling Washington and Washington foreign policy and military, realizing they have lost this epic battle, take the whole world down with them in a nuclear Armageddon? Those are the final lines in conclusion to my film, 30 Seconds to Midnight. I fear now that we are facing the final countdown to doomsday. I only ask for your respect and that you carefully read and watch everything I have included in this lengthy live stream. I think I and others like me deserve that much before we are written off as traitors or Kremlin assets. I'm Regis Tremblay, Yalta, the Crimea, in the Russian Federation, February 22nd, 2024. Thank you for watching.